Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. Matthew is going to be talking about some civil litigation he's been engaged in Pennsylvania. He had a client in Berks County where they have a family detention center, and she was sexually assaulted several years ago, around the time we started this podcast, actually. So he's been involved in the civil litigation. He wants to talk about that case. Really interesting stuff. Other than that, we're just grinding along here. Things are not great. We talk about impeachment for a good while. So if you like the show, subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. You can leave a review on iTunes and share it around on the Twitter and other places. We have a Twitter. It's at RedirectPod. Do a little bit of tweeting over there, but not too much. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the show. You were saying that watching impeachment is a little bit like professional wrestling, right?
Yeah, because it's like a predetermined outcome.
Yeah, so I've been watching on C-SPAN, and C-SPAN does this thing where they take calls at every break. So every time there's a intermission or a break, they take calls and read text messages, and they've got a Republican line and a Democrat line. And then they'll interview senators and representatives in sort of like these press gaggles or whatever. And everyone's mind is made up. The Republicans will say, it's so boring, it's so repetitive. You know, they keep saying the same thing over and over again. And then they'll summarize the facts wrong. It's like, it's repetitive, but apparently not repetitive enough because you're not absorbing any of the information.
Yeah, I mean, what are they saying? Like, it's all the Russian hoax, or they probably think they're still talking about the Mueller report or something. It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden was totally corrupt.
Right. One of the representatives from the president's House defense team or whatever was saying there was Ukrainian interference, actually. There's lots of evidence of it. For example, there was a Ukrainian guy who wrote like an op-ed criticizing Trump during the election. That's now election interference. By that standard, voting is election interference, right? And then they found this black ledger in the home of the former president who was run out of town. And it had all these illicit payments to these different people, including Paul Manafort. And so this information was corroborated by the FBI. But they used it to convict Paul Manafort of certain crimes. And that is apparently a sign that Ukrainians are after Trump. The fact that evidence against...
The fact that Donald Trump hired someone who is so completely corrupt.
A guy who did crimes in Ukraine. That's a sign that they're after him. I don't know. So, yeah, just stuff like that. It's kind of obnoxious. But I got to say, Adam Schiff, from a lawyer's perspective... Well, from anybody's perspective, he's doing like a really good job putting on a good show.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. So, that's the thing that it just doesn't matter. They could get a video and they could have like Trump with a gun to Zelensky's head saying, listen, if you don't announce an investigation on Biden, not only are you not going to get the aid, but I'm going to kill you. And the Republicans would be like, joking. He's a jokester. Doesn't mean anything.
He's the president. He gets to do that.
And plus, like, Biden and Burisma and Hunter, they're totally corrupt. So, I mean, he's just looking out for us.
It's almost like, imagine there was video of the president, like, admitting to sexual assault. And, you know, and not only, like, admitting to it, but, like, bragging about it. And then the Republicans still supported him. It's almost as if that could happen.
That's ridiculous. Well, what do you think about the Democrats saying like, okay, Biden's, you go and testify?
I'm honestly like pretty up in the air about this because on the one hand, I mean, that was the whole point of going over there and digging up this stuff and lending some credibility to this sort of conspiracy theory about Ukrainian interference and all these things. And it seems like the evidence is pretty clear that Biden helped to force out the prosecutor who wasn't prosecuting corruption, and that by doing so, he actually increased the likelihood of his son being investigated as part of this corrupt Ukrainian gas company. That seems to be the fact. But it doesn't matter to the Republicans. They'll just say the opposite over and over again, despite the evidence and the witnesses. By bringing these people forward, I think that you do kind of distract from the real point, which is that Trump was shaking down a foreign government for his own personal gain. Now, what I wish the Democrats would do is come out with an undue influence bill that says something along the lines of, if you're in any of the branches of government, a judge or a congressperson, a senator, or in the executive branch, you need to publish the places of employment and the income of your children. It needs to be available and maybe accessible via FOIA or whatever. Because we've talked about this before. I don't think you can really say like, well, your dad is a congressman, so you can't take a job now, right? So I think that the best you could do is to make that information accessible and transparent so that people can identify conflicts of interest. So if the Democrats were smart, what they would do is say, we're not going to present them, but here's a bill that would address the underlying problem. Right?
I'm of two minds. One, I kind of agree with what you say. I mean, they are really irrelevant. But I don't know. I think if the Democrats would just call their bluffs, and I think if Joe Biden would be on board, say like, yeah, I'll come testify. This is total bull.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever you want to ask me. But I think the Democrats are also protecting him as well.
Right.
So again, if he testifies, I guess Trump in a way gets what he wanted, because people are like, oh, he's testifying. And, a lot of people are going to look at it and not fully understand. They're not going to listen to what he says. Anyone asking him questions, the questions are going to be 5 minutes long about how he's corrupt and Hunter is corrupt. And then they're going to go, isn't that true? It will be dumb, right? I do think they're trying. I really do think the establishment is really doing their best to protect Joe Biden. And there are like legitimate questions, like you were in control of the Ukraine policy, and then your son takes this job, and like you didn't really know anything about it. You knew he took the job, so you should have said, "Hey, Hunter, that's not cool." And then maybe Hunter would have said, "Well, I don't care if it's not cool or not. I'm taking the job." But it does look shady. And I think he should own it. I think he should own it. Say, yeah, I understand how it looks, and, it shouldn't happen, and, we should address it some way.
So far, the only thing that he's really addressed is to say that he wouldn't do it in the future, but that it was also not bad to have done it in the past, which seems like a contradiction, right? A little bit. But part of the case, I think it was yesterday, was that the whole Ukraine interfered, not Russia thing, the whole idea that like Biden fired the prosecutor to protect his son, all of that is bull. And this was part of the case. Trump knew it because his advisors had told him over and over again, this is not real. And so instead of engaging with the proper channels, the State Department and whatnot, he sends his lawyer over there to do it, to dig up something that he knew or should have known was bull. So Biden could be a relevant witness in that he could go up there and testify to the things that have already been established by other witnesses, which is that the prosecutor was corrupt. He wasn't investigating corruption. He got fired. And Biden could get up there and defend himself in that aspect and to say,
But do you think Biden can defend himself? Do you think he has the wits about him to be able to do that?
Right. That's the question.
I mean, he's going to be facing down Doug Collins, not Corn Pop. It's not Corn Pop back at the pool.
It's not Corn Pop. Now, I do want to play you one clip. One thing I'm really excited about, I'm going to be glued to the TV tomorrow, is the president's defense. Because whatever you think about impeachment, the impeachment team has been incredible. I mean, they've been really, really good. Very compelling stuff. And I would encourage people to at least go back and listen to Adam Schiff's closing from last night, Thursday. But there was this moment the other day when I think her name is Val Demings. So she was talking about the White House has been saying, look, if you want these documents, I mean, we know we're ignoring your subpoenas, but you could do FOIA lawsuits, right? Like you could have third-party FOIAs, and then when you get redacted stuff, you could just sue and you could litigate these issues in court. And why don't you do that? And Val Deming's point was like, that's not a substitute for the subpoena power and the oversight power of Congress. So FOIA lawsuits, right? And then Jay Sekulow, who's Trump's TV lawyer. He's like literally a TV lawyer.
Okay, to be fair,
gets up and
I think he's argued multiple times before Supreme Court. So, yeah.
Is that true?
I think he loses, but I mean,
okay.
He does all those like religious
He's been
freedom cases and all that. So,
oh, sure. Okay.
I mean, he still sucks.
Yeah. So I guess here's the question, right? It seems like there's people who are definitely going to vote for it for removal. And then there's people who definitely aren't. And the question is if there's a soft middle space of people who are undecided. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it.
I think there's probably a fairly large amount of Republicans who know that Trump did was wrong, but they're not going to vote to convict him. They're just not. They're going to see no benefit. Democrats will say, oh my God, what courage and all that. And then, they'll get voted out the next election. So
there was this story about apparently the Trump people threatening the senators that your head will be on a pike if you vote against me. The reason why I think impeachment is important, not because I think he's going to be removed tomorrow, but he's definitely threatening people and committing additional crimes to cover up his pre-existing crimes, like on a daily basis. So it's valuable to have this thing going and to be pushing for witnesses and documents. And I do think there could be a moment where the public starts to get this sense of like, oh, there's documents that could vindicate the president entirely. Notes about certain conversations that could completely support his position. And yet he won't release them. That's weird. And then you could have additional whistleblowers about other countries.
Well, then Trump's going to have to make the argument that he's really looking out for the integrity of the office, right? It's not about him. It's about the presidency. And he's protecting future presidents' ability to do their job and to have their staff and the people around them work in confidence.
Right.
Now, anyone who believes that is a fool. I mean, which would probably accurately describe the vast majority of his supporters. But he doesn't do anything that is within the norms of the presidency, except this is the one issue that he's really like, he's going to make sure that other presidents are protected and presidential norms or whatever bullshit. But, if there was something out there that completely exonerated him or even made him look good, he would have released it.
Right. It's one thing to just talk about witnesses or documents. There's specific notes about specific conversations. Like there's a conversation on September 7th where he talks to Gordon Sondland and says, no quid pro quo. And then according to other people who knew about the conversation, he also said he just needs to start the investigation.
I mean, the thing is, Trump had no idea what quid pro quo meant. So
right.
He thought it was like a Lebanese salad or something like that.
So the State Department employees who knew about that conversation, their contemporaneous notes have been withheld by the State Department. And there's this question about what was said exactly on that phone call. And like, there's a way to find out. There's a way to know. And the White House, for some reason, doesn't want those notes to come out.
Read the transcript.
So
read the transcript.
Right. So anyways, the value, again, is not because I think they're going to vote to remove him tomorrow, but you just keep these things around long enough. And people forget the Hillary email server whole scandal, which was pretty much made up, came about during the Benghazi investigation. So
I assume that there are people suing for these documents, right?
Yeah, a bunch of the emails were released, but they're highly redacted. So we know they exist. Yeah, I'm assuming that they're suing to have them unredacted, but that takes a long time. So,
well, hopefully it'll be done before the election, and maybe this will be an October surprise. So the stuff will come out.
Yeah.
I mean, The thing is, I'm not even sure if all this information came out, if it would make a difference.
That's what I was saying earlier. I'm excited to see the president's defense because I'm not really sure if it's going to be that he didn't do it or that it doesn't matter? Because you hear both.
I mean, which is fine. I mean, people might, oh, that's contradictory, but I think we do that a lot with legal arguments. We're like,
right, like assuming arguendo.
yeah, like, here's our argument. Now, if you don't buy that argument, then we also have this argument as well. So I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything contradictory about that.
Impermissible, right?
Yeah, but I don't know why that wouldn't be their main argument. Because
Which one? That it doesn't matter?
yeah. I mean, I think it's a better argument for them to say that nothing happened, that everything was perfect, when it's obvious that everything wasn't perfect. So this goes totally against who Trump is. But if at the beginning Trump came out and said, hey, I know maybe I was like a little inarticulate with my words, and, you know, I kind of thought there was something there. I shouldn't have done it. You know, we didn't really hold up aid. Aid got released. You know, something like that. I understand it looks bad and it wasn't my intention. I think this would have blown over. I don't think it would have been as big.
Yeah.
But the whole defiance, I did nothing wrong, I was perfect. It's hard for that defense. I mean, it's going to win because it's loaded. But I think the defense as like, hey, you know what? Maybe he was a little clumsy with the way he went about things, but kind of no harm, no foul, and, you know, whatever other spin you want to be on it, I think is the better way to go about it. I don't buy it. It doesn't convince me, but I think it'd be a softer landing spot for a lot of these senators.
Yeah, the problem is, like, he not only didn't do that, but he did one of his helicopter press conferences where he was like, yeah, they should. I did want them to investigate the Bidens, and they should, and also China.
I believe Trump believes he didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
I think that's clear. But you hear him in other things. Did you see like the little press conference or the little meet and greet thing he had with, I think it was the Iraqi Kurdistan leader in Davos?
Right.
So he's sitting down with this guy is the Iraqi Kurdistan leader. And at first he's talking about how great they've been in Syria, on the border of Syria, and they're being protected. And Iraqi Kurdistan is in Iraq. That's why they call it Iraqi Kurdistan.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But then he talks about how our troops are there taking the oil.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been pointed out to him, I'm sure, time and time again, that we can't do that. That is a war crime. And he does not.
Pillaging? We're not allowed to pillage.
I mean, he must understand the words that people are saying to him, right? Taking oil from land that we don't own is a war crime when it's done at war, like in Syria. That would be a war crime, Mr. President.
Right.
I'm sure people have said that to him over and over again. He doesn't care. It's not even like he's hiding it. It's not like, oh, we're just protecting the oil for the Syrians. It's like, yeah, we're protecting the oil so we can take it, and we're taking it. I don't even know if that's true or not.
Right. I was going to ask, like, is that even a thing?
But it's probably not even true. Like, he's admitting to crimes that we're probably not doing.
Not doing? That's so funny. Yeah.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Donald Trump, not a good president.
Yeah.
I mean, and that might be the first time I've expressed that opinion here.
Starting to look that way. I'm starting to have my doubts. This is the last thing, then we'll get into what the show's supposed to be about. Somebody asked him at Davos about entitlement reform. And he's like, yeah, we're going to look into that. But we've got the hottest economy. We're just the hottest country right now. And so we're definitely going to look at that. We're going to look at a lot of things. And it became apparent in the course of his answer that, like, it doesn't seem totally clear that he knows what entitlements are. Like, even what he's saying, he has this way of just shifting into these gears, like talking about the election and how he won and nobody expected him to, and talking about low unemployment. So all of a sudden he's talking about low African-American unemployment rates and a question about cutting Social Security. It was really weird.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to admit, that must be a hard job, right? Can you imagine like going somewhere and like people are going to ask you questions about 10 different things and you're not prepared? But you can always tell when he doesn't really know what he's talking about because he'll shift into, you know, the election or.
But that's always, that's the thing.
I mean, I'm, you know, trying to be kind.
There's also ways, I think, if you were to go back and listen to Obama clips or whoever, I'm sure there were plenty of times where they were taken a little off guard or they didn't totally know, but you couldn't tell because they knew more or less
something.
how to say something that sounded coherent.
They knew how to talk.
Anyhow, all right. So Matthew, you wanted to talk about Berks. Now, for the folks who don't know, what is Berks?
So Berks is the family detention center in Leesport, Pennsylvania, which is right by Reading, Pennsylvania.
If it had a jingle to go with its Orwellian name, what would it be?
A jingle?
Berks Family Detention Center.
Yes. So this is akin to the family detention centers that are in Texas.
It's a jail.
It's a jail. I mean,
kids.
So families, moms and dads who come to the United States with their kids are locked up there in a secured facility, though Berks will go through great lengths to say that they're an unsecured facility, but that's a little crap. But anyway, so they're not allowed to leave. And so you have children, they've had infants in there and children up until the age of 18. On your 18th birthday, and this has happened, people will be celebrating their 18th birthday there. And then like before they even get to eat like a piece of their cake, they're putting handcuffs on and taken to the adult prison. And if their parents are there with them, which they would be, then their parents are hauled off to the adult prison as well. So it's a really joyful place. And I got involved, Bridget Cambria, who was on our show a few weeks ago, got me involved back in 2014, doing some cases. And one of the cases I did, after a few consultations with the lady that we'll refer to as ED, she was 19 and her son was 3. And she informed me that one of the guards there had been involved in a sexual relationship, which would be institutional sexual assault. So that prompted an investigation had already been done. He had been fired and he was being prosecuted.
Is this like a GEO employee or an
No,
ICE
this is
employee?
a county. So Berks is run by Berks County. Berks is a county in Pennsylvania. And so they're all county employees. The county has a contract with ICE for not only this detention center, but also they have office space there. And ICE pays them $1 million a year.
What?
For this office space.
What?
Yeah. And so the office space is really not that big. I mean, but they pay them $1 million a year for it. So Berks is really invested in this place. And it's not so much because of the people that are being detained there. They get money for that too, but I think it pales in comparison to the $1 million they get for renting out space to ICE and ERO, which is enforcement and removal officers. So my client, to kind of speed ahead in the story, my client was sexually assaulted there. The guard was fired, arrested. He ended up doing maybe 5 months in jail. My client fully cooperated. Currently, she just received a final U visa. Her son, and actually her mom, because she was only 19 at the time, and her mom was in Georgia, undocumented, so her mom got to benefit from that as well. We sued with the help of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project. We sued the guard as well as a facility in Berks County itself. So it's the first time I've ever been involved in this type of civil lawsuit, a civil rights type lawsuit. And boy, is it a lot of work. Like, Stephen, we talk about immigration court and all that. The amount of work that goes into these types of cases, like, it's unbelievable. And the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project was great. Su Ming Ye, who's now the acting executive director, was key. And so the case went on. We filed it in 2016. And then we were all ready for trial, I think in 2017 or 18. Things take a long time. Berks filed for motion for summary judgment. The judge denied it. And they took that on appeal to the Third Circuit, which gave us a case, ED v. Sharkey, in the Third Circuit, where the Third Circuit, as a presidential decision, had to come out and say that immigration detainees have constitutional rights. So nice. We had to litigate that, and we won. It was also important, it said that immigration detention is like pretrial detention, and it cannot be punitive. So now when we're seeking bond for individuals, we always bring up this case. So those judges that will say, Well, you have a DUI from 10 years ago and you've driven without a license twice since then. You really haven't learned your lesson, no bond. We can point to EDV Sharkey and say, sounds like you're being punitive rather than...
Oh, no, not punitive. He's just super dangerous. He's a danger.
Yeah. So we won that, which was an important case, and we're back on to getting ready for a trial. And it was me, Su Ming Ye, and another attorney from Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, Matthew Feldman, starting to get ready for this kind of Herculean task. A lot of witnesses, a lot of videos that we have to kind of go through and start prepping. Our client is in Georgia, so we have to bring her up. We have another witness from Maryland that we have. So there's so much that goes into it. And a big firm here in town, Decker, jumped in at like the last minute. And this guy who used to be a city solicitor in Philadelphia and was a U.S. attorney, Sosi Talante, was the main guy who came over on our thing. And it would be like, Stephen, if me and you had a few other scrubs and we were in the YMCA league for basketball, and we got to like the championship game, and the other team, they're all like really excited and they're like, yeah, these scrubs. And then we're like, oh, by the way, we have two new players, and like LeBron James and like Anthony Davis like walk onto the court.
Right.
So having these guys from Decker was amazing. I mean, the whole firm, we're in their conference room. They're bringing out sandwiches for us, and it's like the real deal. And anything that we needed, the AV guys are running into their room. How can we help you fix this? We had all these videos, and it was amazing. And that's just one part. And then these guys are like really experienced litigators, and they're really amazing.
So what were you doing there?
I was pretty much, I was eating the sandwiches.
Like if LeBron showed up, I'd be like, all right, I guess I'll...
Dude, I was just along for the ride the whole time. It's so completely different than immigration court. I felt like, a fish out of water or whatever, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully I added some contributions to the team, but we had a pretrial conference scheduled for Wednesday. And then Burks came to us a week before and said, hey, we're interested in talking about settlement. And prior to that, the most they had offered was $5,000 to settle the case. So
nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we were at $150,000. So we're like, well, we've gone all this time and you guys haven't shown any interest. So we were a little skeptical. And before we went to settlement, they offered like $15,000. We're like, well, that's really nothing. And then by the time we got there, I think they were at $25,000. So we went to day of settlement, and the federal judge, Judge Smith from the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, he sits in Easton, Pennsylvania. He kind of brought us in and he mediated the whole thing, and I think he did a really good job. And we ended up settling at $75,000. So our client is happy. She was going to have to come from Georgia. She was probably going to be in Pennsylvania for at least 10 days away from her children, having to relive a lot of these things. So she gets to close this chapter of her life. And as fun as the trial would have been, I would have been like 10 days up in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is like an hour and a half to 2 hours from where I am.
Right.
And my office would have been closed the whole time. And it would have been very traumatic for my client, because not only would she have to testify, but the abuser would have testified. All these other people would have been testifying, talking about her and the abuse, right? So it would not have been a pleasant time.
It's funny that I think there's this feeling, even amongst lawyers maybe, that if something bad happens to you, you just kind of sue and then you get a bunch of money, and that's the way it works. And you're saying that she was sexually assaulted in detention, and after years of litigation, the jail wanted to give her $5,000.
Yeah.
And that if it weren't for a Herculean effort of experienced litigators, that's where it would have stood. And you think about all the people who are denied access to justice in the immigration system, who don't even probably get any type of lawsuit off the ground. Yeah,
this is why groups like Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project are so awesome, because they take on these cases. And what's interesting, if it's a civil rights case, we call 1983 action, is the prevailing party, if we prevailed after trial, they would have been on the hook for attorney fees. Now, I think our attorney fees at the time of settlement, and this is really before Deckert hadn't done anything too substantial. We hadn't even calculated. It was just mine and Su Ming's work, was over $200,000. So by the end of the trial, we easily would have been over $300,000.
Right.
And so here's a real calculus, and it's a good ethics question. If we had gone through and won, even if the jury said we're only going to give you $5,000 for your damages, we then, the attorneys, would have made out. We would have got this huge attorney fee judgment that they would have had to pay out to us. And I didn't quite understand, because I'm new to it. And I'm like, well, can't we just kind of split that with her? And they're like, no, actually, you can't. It's prohibited. I mean, they're like, you can give her a gift if you want, but you can't split attorney fees with non-attorneys. And so then we had to, look at, okay, well, what's obviously the best.
That's a cool rule that was almost certainly designed by a lawyer.
Well, no, I mean, the thinking behind it in the civil rights case is no lawyer would take a case other than a legal aid attorney because the payouts are so low.
Right.
Right. So a typical inmate case, not talking about immigration detainees, a criminal inmate, Su Ming would tell me, maybe $30,000, $40,000. No one's going to take that case except for someone like the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project because they receive other funding from that. So it's really, really an incentive, because if they go all the way to trial and they win, maybe their client doesn't get that much, but then they're going to get attorney fees. So there are some negatives to it, but the hope is that attorneys act ethically,
right,
in the best interest of their client. And we know that, at least we do.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, we can say that we're crappy attorneys, but at least me and you are ethical.
Right. I think so.
But the thing about Burks is, I think, we're happy with the settlement. But to go back to the initial description, Burks is a place that still, imprisons children. That hasn't changed.
Right. Well, again, I'm just forced to think about all these stories we've been seeing about poisonous burritos, burritos that are making detainees sick. CBP seems to know about that. Other stories of sexual assault, mistreatment. And a lot of these people they don't have access to any type of counsel. And so they don't even know that suing might be an option or whatever.
Well, I mean, the problem with sexual assault in immigration detention, I think, is it's huge. Emily Cassie from New York Times, I think she was doing it through the Marshall Project. The New York Times published it, did a documentary, and my client was one of the subjects, and it was about sexual assault. But in the piece, I learned that Daniel Sharkey was one of the only prosecutions of a guard who committed sexual assault against an immigration detainee in the country in over many, many years. So there are a lot of investigations, just not a lot of follow through.
Well, good work on that case.
But, I mean, we're happy that we were able to get him prosecuted, and we're happy that we were able to get the settlement. Now, I have to admit, we're all kind of a little bummed out we didn't get to do the trial, because the trial would have been kind of fun, because Daniel Sharkey, who was not represented he never entered his appearance, so attorney appeared for him. He wasn't being represented by the people representing the other Burks employees. He said he was going to come and testify. We did a deposition of him, and the deposition was awesome. So it would have been really good theater. And we've had a few reporters kind of grumble, oh, we really wanted a trial. Well, yeah. But
I mean, weren't you just grumbling about that a second ago? Not in that voice, but.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was of two. My wife would have maybe filed for divorce if I was in Easton for 10 days doing a trial.
Well, I mean, there's more than one positive is what you're saying. Just kidding.
It's amazing work, though. I mean, people who do that type of work, I mean, it's so labor intensive.
Right.
But it was a good experience. I don't really want to repeat, I'll be honest.
Well, good work on that case. And thanks for sharing your story. Anything else going on this week in immigration?
Oh, well, I mean, the full line sending people to Guatemala is now a real thing.
Mexicans, right?
No, well, I think Hondurans, right?
Right. I think Salvadorans and Hondurans are going to Guatemala, and Mexicans not yet, but probably soon. So that's cool.
But I think the ICE guy came out and he's like, yeah, we sent 96 people to Guatemala and only one person has filed for asylum. That just shows you basically they're all full of to begin with. It's like, no, it shows you, why would you want to be in Guatemala? I mean, it's a beautiful country. It'd be nice to visit, but, a country that has all the problems that your country has, why would you think setting up shop there would be helpful?
Right. So I have some Honduran clients fleeing domestic violence type situations, went to Mexico and tried to set up their life there. But the problem is, like, their persecutors can just follow them. It's not that hard to move around Central America. So Guatemala is objectively not safe. It's like, if you're from El Salvador, Guatemala is not a good alternative. And also, this is the thing that I think we mentioned this before, but if you're from El Salvador and you're coming here to seek asylum, it's almost certainly because you have family here and someplace you can live and get started. And I'm sure there exists in the world of human experience people from El Salvador who don't have family here, but do have family in Guatemala. And those people probably choose to go to Guatemala rather than come all the way to the United States. Like, I'm sure those situations exist. But to just take somebody who's got family in Philadelphia and they're fleeing some sort of violent situation and they want to live in the basement of their cousin or whoever, and to say, okay, well, seek asylum in Guatemala, a place that is objectively dangerous and where you don't know anyone, it's absurd.
Yeah, so that's cool.
That's cool.
And I don't know if we started sending people to Honduras, but I guess that's next.
Yeah. This is the cool thing about doing an immigration podcast is, like, you don't know. And even if we knew for sure by the time it's uploaded, it would be different. But ICE is talking about, they're gearing up for deporting people with DACA who have removal orders.
Yeah, they're waiting for that Supreme Court decision to come down to give them the go-ahead. And they seem very excited.
They're really into it. Just so people know, if you have DACA and you've never been ordered deported, if ICE were to pick you up, you'd most likely qualify for some sort of removal defense and you'd be in court for years. And I'm not saying it would be a good thing, but there might be options for you if you are put in removal proceedings. But there are some people with DACA who've been ordered removed already, and their removal was stayed or stopped by virtue of having deferred action. And if you take away deferred action, they're left with a removal order. And the sort of insidious thing, I mean, it's not good to deport anyone, but for a lot of these DACA recipients, the removal order happened when they were children. So I had a client once came into the country from Central America illegally. They were placed in removal proceedings. They were with their mother and they just didn't go to court. Now the kid was like 3, so not even forming long-term memories, certainly not in a position to make a decision about going to court. But by failing to appear in court, they have a removal order now, which is the same as a removal order of, any other type of removal order. So if their DACA is taken away, they're in a much trickier situation because they have virtually no defense to being picked up and immediately deported from the country. So that's cool. That's a cool thing.
I don't know, but just kind of like the way they're talking about it is, you think they would be a little bit more chagrined about it. Oh, we're going to have to execute in these orders and it's the law. But, it's just like they seem a little giddy about it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the thing is, they don't have to. Some people have said online, well, I mean, if you've got a removal order, then, they can execute it. And like, nobody's questioning whether or not they can, right? Of course they can. The law is absurd. Plenty of absurd things can happen under the law, but they also don't have to. And also we need to change the law. So
what is really aggravating is whenever there's someone who had an ICE detainer on him that some municipality didn't honor, goes on and either commits a crime or like ICE finally picks him up like a year later. They release a big press release saying, if only San Francisco had turned over this guy, or Philadelphia or Chicago or New York, and then look at all these bad things. We put a detainer on them and they ignored it. But what they never say is, like, did they even try to get the guy?
Right.
Because what happens, right? I think there was one in New York where the guy had been arrested a few times, and some were like some serious charges. And I think one was even like a domestic thing, or it was a sexual assault thing. So he probably had to report. He was probably on some type of reporting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I almost guarantee he never once went to the guy's house.
Right.
Like, to look for him.
Right.
But they'll go if, like, I just had someone recently picked up a couple of weeks ago, a mom, no criminal record. She had a prior order. They went to her house. They got her.
Right. I had a client a few years ago. I couldn't track him down, and he had a hearing coming up. And so we're trying to figure out his contact information. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm going to call his local municipal court where he lives, a small town, and say, like, hey, have you guys like heard from this guy? Like, by any chance, maybe he's been arrested or something? Sure enough, he had a recent driving without a license, and they were able to give me his phone number and his address, like with a phone call. And I'm not some private detective or whatever, but if somebody's getting out of county, certainly the county jail could provide ICE with his address or his phone number or whatever. Yeah. In the time that they say they weren't able to get that guy, just like you're saying, they arrested dozens of people who were like just minding their own business. So yeah, it's really dumb. Everything right now, I just can't stress this enough, is so dumb and cruel. It's not dumb. Dumb is sort of like, soft pedaling it.
Someone who was tweeting about, I think your guy, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah. Friend of the show.
And they're saying how voting for him would be like a moral failing if he was to be the nominee. Maybe they just meant for the primary. And I like Mayor Pete for like a few seconds because I do kind of like the way he talks. I think he's a nice talker. The more I gotten to know about him and his policies, I'm not a big fan of him. I wouldn't support him in the primary. But if we're talking about someone like Mayor Pete or someone like Joe Biden, right, versus Donald Trump, we cannot sit there and say they would be the same.
Right. Yeah.
Here's the deal. Any Democrat that wins, they're immediately going to be filling all these top positions. And I'm only talking about immigration now. So I have my blinders eye. I'm only talking about immigration. They're going to fill up these positions with Democrats, people that are a lot more sympathetic to our cause. The MAGA people are going to be gone. Hopefully we would get an attorney general that would do the right thing and rescind a lot of these AG decisions like matter of AB, matter of LEA, reverse a lot of these things. And I think there'd be a lot of pressure because immigration is going to play such a key role in this. Now, would they do all that? I would be hopeful. We know Trump won't do it, right? So Trump is the known. And we know the known is a nightmare.
Right.
So even if the unknown, Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden, would they do everything we wanted? Probably not. But they have to be better. They could not go in and be worse, right?
Well, the time to have you got to vote for the Democrat conversation, I guess, is after the convention, right?
Right.
But for now, the debate is over which one. And I do think we got to be careful because a lot of these things, like we've talked about, there's a really good chance, even with the best candidate, that this stuff just gets entrenched in the existing structure. And the candidate, even if it's Bernie Sanders, goes on to focus entirely on healthcare or student debt or things that are good, but MPP chugs along and we're in year 2, we're in year 3 of his administration going, hey, when are we going to get around to this thing, right?
But you do think we would have a better chance to get rid of that stuff if there was a Democrat?
Well, yeah, of course. But the question right now is not just, it's not a 2-person race. So the question now is going to be, there's the electability argument, which one's going to win or which one could win, and then which one's most likely to undo this stuff. So don't be dumb, people.
I think now I'm officially a Bernie guy.
Mm-hmm. Bernie bro.
Yeah. Yeah, some Bernie people out there need to lighten up a little bit, though.
Yeah,
just a little bit. I love the passion. Need to lighten up just a little bit. That's all. Not every candidate who's not Bernie Sanders is a Nazi. Let's just kind of use that as maybe like a small step that we can all take.
Right. Well, it's good talking to you.
Was it?
I mean, for the most part. And I got to go now, but we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Good night.
All right. Bye.